Recently, the United States and Iran have clashed once again. In the early morning of the 28th, Israel and the United States launched attacks on Iran, killing Iran's supreme leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. Hours later, Iranian missiles were fired toward Israel, as well as U.S. military bases in Bahrain, Qatar, and the United Arab Emirates. Trump stated that the operation was aimed at destroying Iran's nuclear weapons program. But Iran is no ordinary player in the Middle East. It is the big brother of the Shia faction. Today, let's discuss what has been happening in the Middle East in recent years, why the U.S.-Iran confrontation that has lasted 47 years escalated into action this year, why the U.S. and Israel shifted their approach, and what fatal strategic mistakes Iran made. To understand why the U.S. decided to strike Iran, we first need a quick review of how this long-standing enmity between the U.S. and Iran developed.
In fact, the two countries once enjoyed a honeymoon period. From the 1950s to the 1970s, Iran under the Pahlavi dynasty was America's strongest ally in the Middle East. During the Cold War, to enlist Iran as the policeman of the Middle East to contain the Soviet Union, the U.S. even sold F-14 Tomcat fighter jets to Iran, the only time America has ever exported them. At that time, Tehran was known as the Paris of the Middle East. Women wore miniskirts, listened to rock music, and the city was the most westernized and fashionable place in the region. Then came 1979. The Grand Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini returned from exile and overthrew the Pahlavi monarchy, establishing an Islamic theocratic republic. This was followed by the Iran hostage crisis at the U.S. Embassy in Tehran. The U.S. severed diplomatic ties with Iran, and from then on, Iran became part of what America called the axis of evil. A confrontation lasting more than 40 years began.
Iran is a Persian Shia Muslim nation, different from the majority Sunni Arab Muslim countries in the Middle East. Simply put, Saudi Arabia is the leader of the Sunni world, while Iran leads the Shia faction. Although both belong to Islam, the two sects have been at odds for over 1,000 years. Iran realized it was a minority in the region. Shias make up only 10 to 15% of Muslims worldwide. Instead of accepting defeat, Iran chose to connect and unite them. It began drawing up a map to create what is known as the Shia Crescent and export its revolution. This strategic arc includes Iran, Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Hamas in Gaza, and Yemen, forming a bloc strong enough to counter the U.S., Israel, and Saudi Arabia. Let's start with Iraq. It was originally ruled by the hardline Sunni leader Saddam Hussein, a bitter enemy of Iran. The two countries fought an 8-year war, the Iran-Iraq War, with no clear winner. Both left bloodied. Then, in 2003, the U.S. removed Saddam. Iraq became a democracy, and elections brought the Shia majority to power. This population shared deep revolutionary ties with Iran. Iran seized the opportunity and gradually infiltrated the country by supporting local militias. These armed groups later became legitimized and integrated into Iraq's military, functioning in reality as Iran's proxies. Next is Syria, the logistics hub of the Shia Crescent. In 2011, the Syrian civil war broke out, and Bashar al-Assad was on the verge of collapse. Iran realized that if Syria fell, the supply line to Lebanon would be cut. So it dispatched the Quds Force of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, along with Hezbollah from Lebanon, to fight in Syria. In return, Iran established military bases there and attempted to control access to the Mediterranean. Then there is Hezbollah in Lebanon. It operates as a state within a state. Iran provides massive funding and missiles, making Hezbollah's military power surpass even that of the Lebanese government army. Among Iran's proxies, Hezbollah is the strongest fighting force and serves as the frontline artillery of the Big Brother.
In Gaza, there is Hamas. Although Hamas is Sunni, as long as it opposes Israel, it is considered a friend. Iran planted this mine right on Israel's southern border. Recently, Hamas engaged Israel in a 2-year war, coordinating with Hezbollah in the north to put Israel under severe two-front pressure. Finally, the Houthis in Yemen. Although not directly connected by land, they extend the Shia Crescent. Iran supports them primarily to keep Saudi Arabia uneasy. The Houthis periodically attack Saudi oil fields, deterring Riyadh from fully backing the U.S. against Iran.
They also fire missiles into the Red Sea, disrupting global shipping and threatening the economies of Europe and the US. This is Iran's Shia Crescent strategy. By supporting these Shia and some opportunistic Sunni militias across the Middle East, Iran transformed itself from an isolated pariah state into the Shia spiritual leader capable of mobilizing hundreds of thousands of fighters. This greatly strengthened its voice in the competition with Saudi Arabia for influence in the Islamic world. But Iran apparently got overconfident. 2 years ago, after watching some videos or analyses, it believed its position was impregnable. Why did the situation change so dramatically, creating an opportunity that the US and Israel could not ignore?
We need to go back to 2015. Then US President Barack Obama signed the Iran nuclear deal, JCPOA, with Iran. This unfroze approximately $100 to $150 billion in Iranian overseas assets, giving Tehran a sudden financial windfall. The US even flew in $400 million in cash. Obama believed that by lifting restrictions, integrating Iran into the global economy, and allowing a middle class to rise, Iran would moderate its behavior. To Trump, who later became president, this was essentially paying protection money to a bandit. The deal included sunset clauses, meaning that after a certain period, Iran could legally resume nuclear weapons development. In 2018, Israel's Mossad stole Iran's nuclear archives, revealing that Iran was secretly continuing nuclear weapons research underground. Moreover, the money from the deal was used to fund the Shia Crescent proxies and attack U.S. allies. For Trump, who prides himself on being a master deal-maker, this was not just a strategic failure, but a profound humiliation. In 2018, Trump withdrew from the deal and launched the first round of maximum pressure. For Israel, surrounded by hostile neighbors and with limited territory and concentrated population, roughly 2/3 the size of Taiwan, the core national policy has always been to prevent any adversarial neighbor from acquiring nuclear weapons. They had bombed Iraq's reactor in 1981 and Syria's in 2007, so striking Iran was consistent with standard procedure. Israel was also encircled by Iran's proxies, Hezbollah, Houthis, and Hamas, and was determined to neutralize the nuclear threat and reduce Iran's overall danger. In 2021, Trump lost the election and Biden took office. Biden tried to revive Obama's approach, softening U.S. policy to bring Iran back to the negotiation table. He eased sanctions on Iranian oil exports, allowing Iran's oil revenue to hit record highs. Iran then funneled that money to the Houthis and Hezbollah. Over the past 2 years, the Houthis launched relentless attacks on commercial ships in the Red Sea, nearly paralyzing global shipping. Iran exploited the Democrats' preference for stability, fear of rising oil prices, and concern over stock market drops. Emboldened by Russian backing and thousands of missiles, Iran ramped up its aggression. What was once Iran's defensive firewall, the Shia Crescent, became increasingly provocative. Hamas launched a surprise attack on Israel, triggering a major war. Hezbollah fired thousands of rockets into northern Israel, forcing 100,000 Israeli civilians to evacuate. Houthis used Iranian-supplied drones to attack shipping, driving up global freight costs dramatically. This convinced the US and Israel that it was better to strike the head, Iran, rather than endlessly intercept cheap drones in the Red Sea. Targeting Iran's production lines and command centers would cut off supplies to the proxies. The decisive turning point came in November 2024, when the Big Brother returned. Trump won the election and re-entered the White House, this time to settle scores. He scrapped Biden's softer policies, assembled a more hardline team, and launched Maximum Pressure 2.0. Militarily, in June 2025, the U.S. delivered a warning blow, conducting intensive strikes on Iranian nuclear facilities over 12 days. The goal was not full-scale war, but to signal that Iran must abandon its nuclear ambitions.
Economically, Trump reinstated harsh oil sanctions and threatened Chinese buyers. Anyone purchasing Iranian oil would face severe consequences. Iran's oil revenue plummeted. Its currency, the rial, became nearly worthless. By January 2026, Iran experienced its largest protests in history. People took to the streets chanting, "Stop spending money on Hezbollah! We want to eat!"
The government responded by cutting off the internet nationwide and using deadly force to suppress demonstrators, evoking images of the final days of the Qing dynasty. On the international stage, Russia's ability to provide a strong air defense umbrella had weakened. By 2026, the Assad regime in Syria had fallen at the end of 2024, depriving Iran of a key buffer. For Putin, the Ukraine battlefield remained the priority. Iran was important but secondary. There were even rumors that Putin tacitly allowed the U.S. action in exchange for reduced U.S. support for Ukraine. Meanwhile, China's economy faced challenges, and with a planned meeting between Xi Jinping and Trump at the end of March, Beijing preferred a more cautious approach. Iran became a bargaining chip in great power negotiations. Trump's maximum pressure 2.0 worked. On February 26, 2026, during negotiations in Geneva, the U.S. demanded that Iran completely dismantle all nuclear facilities and ship all enriched uranium to the United States. Iran rejected the demands outright. Based on intelligence assessments, Iran was only weeks or even days away from producing enough fissile material for its first nuclear warhead. Supreme Leader Khamenei and several top officials were scheduled to hold a secret meeting on the 28th. Trump and Netanyahu decided they could not wait any longer. They launched a dual decapitation and denuclearization strike, which produced the scenes we witnessed. The democratic approach relies on diplomacy, sanctions, and alliances to avoid war, prioritizing the safe return of soldiers and protecting allies. Its downside is a sense of humiliation, weakened deterrence, and emboldened adversaries. The Republican approach uses military strength and credible threats to make opponents fear America, aiming for long-term peace. Its downside includes regional instability, attacks on allies, and short-term market turmoil. There is no single correct answer. Each strategy has two possible outcomes. Biden's successful version, adversaries are constrained, conflicts decrease, markets stabilize, and everyone prospers.
Failure version. Adversaries use the time to grow stronger, leading to larger future conflicts. Trump's ideal version, adversaries are deterred and behave, achieving lasting peace. Failure version. Opponents retaliate, escalating war and causing prolonged instability. It ultimately comes down to whether one fears war more or being challenged. So, what strategic mistakes did Iran commit? First, it underestimated Trump as an individual. Iran assumed Trump, like Biden, would avoid entanglement in another Middle East conflict. It failed to grasp the atypical logic of Trump's second term. He disregards the UN, bypasses traditional congressional procedures, and pursues Trump-style justice backed by raw power. He does not hesitate to use missiles. Second, the Shia Crescent became a fiscal black hole. For years, funding these proxies drove Iran's domestic inflation above 50%. Meanwhile, from 2024 to 2025, the US and Israel had significantly weakened these proxies. Israel used advanced operations, including pager explosions, to decapitate Hezbollah leadership, forcing them back to primitive communications. Internal divisions emerged within Iraqi Shia groups, with some refusing to serve as Iran's cannon fodder. By 2026, Iran's command system was heavily penetrated, exposing high-level movements. Instead of providing support, the proxies became liabilities. Third, complete failure in nuclear strategy. To acquire nuclear weapons, a country must either buy an early bird ticket, developing them before major powers can intervene effectively, or follow a hermit path. India and Pakistan succeeded because they forced their way in during the late Cold War when great powers were distracted. North Korea succeeded as a true hermit state, poor, isolated, with nothing to lose except survival. It threatens massive retaliation against U.S. allies, especially Seoul, if attacked. Iran, however, combined the worst elements. Located in a critical global energy region, it pursued nuclear weapons while simultaneously expanding influence through aggressive proxy networks. It was like a robber rushing into a department store with a grenade while trying to direct shoppers. This provoked all nearby powers, Saudi Arabia, Israel, and the US, into deciding they must first disarm the threat.
Finally, there may be a less openly discussed reason involving Trump himself. His reciprocal tariff policies had recently been ruled unconstitutional by the Supreme Court, damaging his prestige. For someone who values face highly, this was intolerable. With 2026 being a U.S. midterm election year, Trump needed a major political bombshell to help Republicans. According to presidential tradition, when domestic issues are difficult, look abroad for a fight. What could rally supporters more than personally eliminating a 40-year American adversary while silencing critics? It is worth noting that Iran's intelligence apparatus had been severely compromised by Israel. Entire nuclear archives were stolen in 2018. Multiple nuclear scientists were assassinated, facilities sabotaged, and senior officials killed. Even a former Iranian president reportedly claimed that the head of Iran's intelligence agency was working for the other side. This sounds absurd, but reflects the reality of modern intelligence warfare. Centralized nodes are vulnerable to penetration.